Recently, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers created a unified international trust. Analysts were puzzled, as most of the 20th century was marked by rivalry between these two clans. There's an official version claiming that the two families decided to unite to survive in times of instability and international financial crisis. But what really happened? The newly formed alliance had many peculiarities, such as the fact that these mega-wealthy clans combined just $40 billion. Such a modest amount might seem interesting to smaller players like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, but not to the biggest sharks of the financial market. Today, the Rothschilds' joint budget, according to some analysts' estimates, exceeds $4 trillion, while the Rockefeller clan's fortune is only $1 trillion less. It appears that this post-crisis capital merger is just the tip of the iceberg in the struggle between secret elites. But if the Rothschild-Rockefeller alliance is preparing to fight someone, it means they're not the most powerful players in the global financial system. So who do they fear, and against whom are they uniting? That's what our video is about. The dynasty's founder, Mayer Rothschild, was born in Germany in 1744, while his American counterpart, John D. Rockefeller Sr., came almost 100 years later. If these are relatively young families in historical perspective, then who controlled the financial system in the world when the Rothschilds and Rockefellers were still finding their feet? A likely candidate for the role of shadow hegemon appears to be the family that founded the Standard Chartered Bank way back in 1613. Real power, secret power, and, as we know, enormous wealth don't like being talked about, which is why the Baruchs have always tried to stay in the shadows. But even they had to step into the light. Bernard Baruch, by twist of fate, had to become an economic advisor to several U.S. presidents. In 1881, the Baruch family moved to New York, and young Bernard went to study at City College. After graduation, he began working as a broker at the New York Stock Exchange and established his own brokerage company in 1903. Despite the popular trend of forming trust companies at the time, Bernard Baruch supposedly conducted his highly profitable brokerage business alone, although his rise was undoubtedly supported by one of the oldest and most influential clans. To the public, Bernard earned the nickname the Lone Wolf of Wall Street and became a dollar millionaire in his early 30s, managing to grow his capital despite endless crises and economic turmoil in the U.S. But the most interesting part begins in 1912 when Baruch played his political card by financing Woodrow Wilson's presidential campaign. After victory, in gratitude for his support, Wilson opened the doors of the U.S. National Defense Agency to Baruch. The shadow elite organized First World War began, and Baruch became head of the U.S. War Industries Board, actively stimulating arms buildup, which temporarily helped overcome a series of economic crises in the United States. It was Baruch, then a presidential advisor, who convinced Wilson to support the creation of the Federal Reserve, and from 1913, the U.S. government transferred the authority to print dollar bills to a commercial structure, the Federal Reserve System. At that time, the global situation was developing rapidly, and thanks to either intuition or insider information, Baruch, along with friendly American and British bank owners, executed a clever and interesting maneuver in the late 1920s. He lobbied for reorienting America's economy towards serving the military-industrial complex, including initiating an artificial crash and plunging the economy into a sluggish and prolonged crisis. He showcased his achievements to a very promising British politician, Winston Churchill, whom he invited to America under the pretext of giving lectures. On October 24, 1929, the day of the New York Stock Exchange crash, Baruch and Churchill visited Wall Street while crowds raged outside the New York Stock Exchange building. He told Churchill that long before the crash, he had stopped playing the stock market, sold all his shares, and instead bought U.S. government bonds, preserving his capital from devaluation. Churchill was impressed, and from then on, their interaction with Baruch took on not only a personal character but also features of strategic partnership. In 1934, together with U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, Bernard Baruch executed a fantastic deal, exchanging China's gold reserves for paper in the form of bonds. Chiang Kai-shek, caught in a string of failures and suffering one defeat after another, agreed to this exchange. As a result, American bankers received about 100 tons of gold bars and countless amounts of silver jewels, and antiques, while Chiang Kai-shek got 250 sheets of paper and a peaceful retirement on Taiwan. By the early 40s, Baruch had already become a billionaire, but the peak of his enrichment from dirty political games came during World War II and the post-war nuclear arms race. The Japanese attacks on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, may have been a surprise to some, but not to Baruch and the U.S. banking elite. This provocation drew America into World War II. The oligarchs and primarily Baruch hit the jackpot. During World War II, Baruch continued to consult the government and had serious influence over the distribution of government military contracts. Huge fortunes were allocated to finance projects proposed by Baruch. He seriously took on the U.S. nuclear program and first thing took control of the atomic industry. Baruch wants to rule the world, the moon, and possibly Jupiter, but we'll see about that, President Truman wrote in his diary. This phrase well illustrates who really made fateful decisions, while the president could only envy but couldn't openly oppose him. Surprisingly, this fate maker didn't hide from people and was quite approachable. He would chat with people in the park, learning about their moods and wishes. Moreover, his security detail wasn't visible. Death caught up with Baruch in 1965. He was buried in an ordinary cemetery on the outskirts of New York. No fences or pompous monuments mark his grave, just a modest small plaque. What's surprising is that today there's no information about the heirs to Bernard Baruch's legendary fortune, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Someone with an all-powerful hand has erased all information. There are many hidden processes in the world, and sometimes it's very difficult for us to figure out who stands behind what in the maze of history, but gradually all that is hidden comes to light. Friends, if you find this topic interesting, support our investigation. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement will help us understand how relevant it would be to conduct a deeper and more detailed investigation. Every response from you is important to us when planning future content.